In this video, you will see 8 dangerous and interesting experiments conducted throughout history. If you're ready, let's begin. The Nazi scientist Joseph Mengele, who conducted deadly and horrifying experiments, perhaps the most horrifying experiments of all time, were conducted by Joseph Mengele, an SS doctor at Auschwitz, hoping to prove his theories on the racial superiority of Aryans. Mengele performed experiments on twins, resulting in the death of many. According to the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, he also collected the eyes of deceased patients. Nazis used prisoners to test treatments for infectious diseases and chemical warfare. Others were forced into experiments in freezing cold and low-pressure chambers to acquire information related to aviation. Countless prisoners underwent experimental sterilization procedures. According to the Holocaust Museum's compiled history, a woman's breasts were tied with strings to determine the time a baby could survive without feeding. Eventually, a lethal dose of morphine was injected to prevent further suffer. Monster study. In 1939, speech pathologists at the University of Iowa conducted disturbing experiments to prove that stuttering was a learned behavior caused by a child's speech anxiety. Unfortunately, the method they chose involved telling orphan children that they would develop stuttering in the future, leading to the onset of stuttering. Researchers met with orphan children, demonstrated stuttering symptoms to them, and told them not to speak until they were sure they could speak correctly. The experiment did not induce stuttering, but it left the previously normal children anxious, withdrawn, and silent. According to a New York Times article from 2003 about the study, future pathology students at Iowa referred to the work as the monster study. The 3 surviving children eventually filed a lawsuit against the university. The Burke and Hare murders. Until the 1830s, the only legal way for anatomists to perform dissections on a cadaver was to use executed murderers, as the number of executed criminals was not sufficient during that period. Many anatomists turned to purchasing bodies from grave robbers or engaging in body snatching themselves. Innkeeper William Hare and his associate William Burke capitalized on this entrepreneurial opportunity. These 2 men killed 16 people over a span of 10 months in 1828. They later sold the corpses to Robert Knox for approximately £10 each. Robert Knox either failed to notice or disregarded the fact that the bodies brought to him were freshly killed. Burke was eventually apprehended and hanged for his crimes. Subsequently, these events prompted the British government to reconsider and relax restrictions on dissection. 731st Unit. During the 1930s and 1940s, the Imperial Japanese Army conducted biological warfare and medical experiments, primarily on civilians in China. The exact number of deaths from these brutal experiments is unknown, but according to a 1995 New York Times report, it is possible that up to 200,000 people died. Among the horrifying experiments and atrocities were wells infected with cholera and typhoid, and fleas carrying bubonic plague spread in Chinese cities. Experiments were also conducted to determine the best treatment for freezing. The prisoners were subjected to freezing temperatures. Former members of the unit told media outlets that prisoners were exposed to poisonous gas, placed in pressure chambers until their eyes popped out, and even dismembered while still alive and conscious. According to the Times report, the US government assisted in keeping the experiments secret as part of a plan to make post-war Japan an ally in the Cold War. Horrifying experiments conducted on slaves. The father of modern gynecology, J. Marion Sims, conducted experimental surgeries on enslaved women, Sims remains a controversial figure to this day because the experimental surgeries he performed to treat vesicovaginal fistula, a condition in women, caused horrifying pain. Women with fistulas between the vagina and bladder were unable to control their urine and were often rejected by society. Sims conducted these surgeries without anesthesia, as anesthesia had been recently discovered, and he believed that the surgeries were not painful enough to require it. Additionally, Sims thought that these surgeries did not warrant the use of anesthesia. Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The most infamous era in the medical ethics of the United States lasted for 40 years. In 1932, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the U.S. Public Health Service initiated a study on the untreated effects of syphilis on health. Unfortunately, participants unaware of the situation were not given syphilis treatment, despite believing that they would be cured through the study's intervention. Tragically, these experiments resulted in the death of participants. The 400 patients involved in the research all perished, without any sign of improvement. Electroshock therapy on children. In the 1960s, Dr. Loretta Bender from the New York Creedmoor Hospital began what she believed to be a revolutionary treatment for children with social issues: electroshock therapy. Bender's methods involved conducting interviews and analyses of a sensitive child in front of a large group, followed by applying mild pressure to the child's head. Allegedly, any child exhibiting movements under pressure was considered to show early signs of schizophrenia. Bender, reportedly lacking empathy for the children in her care, who were victims of misunderstood childhood, administered electroshock therapy to over 100 children, the youngest being 3 years old. The Operation Midnight Climax experiment. Operation Midnight Climax, initiated in 1954, aimed to study the effects of LSD on individuals. Non-consenting subjects were lured into safe houses by prostitutes on the CIA payroll. For this experiment, subsequently, their reactions were then recorded. All of these experiments and actions were illegal. However, this did not deter the CIA. Instead, they expanded these experiments. After a while, CIA agents began administering doses to individuals in public areas. These experiments were terminated between 1963 and 1966. You can subscribe to our channel to access content like this. If you like and share the video, you'll be supporting us. See you in the next episode.